Welcome to the Death and All the Rest podcast, where we talk about life, death, and everything in between.
Hello.
Hey, hey, Chris. There we go. Okay. uh, so we have a topic for today:
Yeah, boundaries.
boundaries.
Boundaries. At least initially, the launch point being boundaries in relationships. And I wasn't quite sure how this related to existential dread, but you connected it when we were doing our little pre-game warm up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, to navigate this life, it requires connection. At least that's a big part of it. And
Yeah.
it seems that we are social creatures, and we look for that, and that is where we find uh, it's our purpose. That's where our ground is in our connection to our species. We are not an island, right?
Mm-hmm.
But navigating relationships is hard. Real
Navigating
damn hard.
relationships is super hard, and having boundaries in your relationships is a means of self care. We
Mm-hmm.
teach this a lot to the clients that we work with as we coach. But like someone actually, it was a listener who asked us to talk about this topic, and so this is something that I think people are finding relatable to their lives, and like it's this balance of I don't know how to set healthy boundaries or what even a healthy boundary for myself may look like in a relationship. And they're, I think, relating this to the existentialism piece for people who are listening, that maybe it doesn't seem like, okay, this is an existential podcast and we're talking about boundaries in relationships. We do talk about life, death, and everything in between, hence the tagline. But like, but also it's like there's a weight of responsibility and obligation that we all get, that's societally reinforced by family systems, by our work, whatever it is that's going on, like all these different areas where we have these responsibilities and obligations that we're balancing, which lends to our interpersonal relationships, our socialization. And then there's this measure, the thing that we constantly relate back to existentialism is how much are you observing and analyzing for yourself how this fits into what you need out of life, what you want out of life. Because you can get really bogged down by certain relationships, by certain interactions, certain kinds of people, certain energy types, all these different things. The boundaries in relationships is work relationships, what kind of relationships you have with coworkers. Um, Depending on who your coworkers are, that might look different. But like this all relates because you need to think about, we encourage people to think about so often, is thinking about for your own life and what you want it to look like, what makes you feel good, what brings you satisfaction and fulfillment, and all of those things that are really important to be thinking about along the way. So we're not getting swept away by decades of life and then looking at the end and saying, wow, I really missed some really valuable, deep connections because I was focused on maintaining all these surface level ones that weren't actually giving me things that I needed, the nourishment that I needed socially and interpersonally. And that's how this relates. And, there are certain relationships that are going to be more taxing on your system, more draining of your energy. And you decide whether you want to have those and how you want to have those. Is that in moderation? Is this a relationship that you're evaluating that maybe just isn't good for you to have? The relationships that feel really good, and stopping and thinking about how these social dynamics fit into your life.
Yeah, all of that. You said that really well. There's a lot to this. I think I
Yeah.
say that a lot too. Uh,
There's always a lot to things.
yeah. Uh, sometimes, sometimes we run roughshod over other people's boundaries, and we don't know we're doing it,
Yeah.
or we do it because it's easy, or we do it frankly because we want something from them, and that can be predatory, can be aggressive,
Mm-hmm.
and there are there's different playing fields. There's different games or social relationships that we engage in as
Mm-hmm.
people that kind of circumscribe what's acceptable to a certain extent,
Sure.
but people still will go over these, um, and we do, all of us do, I think, some level or another. And it's important to kind of like know where those lines are in the sand
Mm-hmm.
and why they're there. And this kind of harkens to ethics And ethics is the rules that we have internally about our behavior, what's
Mm-hmm.
acceptable and what isn't.
Yeah.
And those are ethics exist because of both pragmatic rules, we get better results out of it, we should, and for how we view what's right and wrong, morals. Ethics are the behaviors that we engage in to keep us morally in line. So maybe there's that part of it. Uh, but I think probably what the person that brought this up to you, who brought up the subject to us, was talking about, like, was more along the lines of like, how do I how do I go through this in life? You know, why do we hold boundaries with people in our lives? Uh, and why is that a good thing? Isn't that just saying no to people? You know,
Yeah.
no.
And no, but yeah, that's, people, there's confusion around that for sure.
um, I have a very like clear, not clear, but I have a very simple principle for this in my life, and this is something I learned myself by just making it through my life so far. Um, in a sense, one of the ways to look at the human mind and human brain and how we live is this is a processing unit. That's not exactly right. We were talking about that a little bit with embodied cognition. There's a whole different way of looking at it, but in a sense, it is. So we're taking in information all the time, and we're reacting to it, and
Yeah.
then we're responding, or we are taking action, receiving feedback from that action, or responses of others, and then responding to that. So there's a whole dance to that. But you, it behooves us in life to be discerning in what we take in, to make choices,
Mm-hmm.
because you can drown in negativity, you can drown in just the behavior of others towards you, especially if it's negative, and that can really affect your sense of self and your identity, and it can destroy you. It can actually destroy you. That's what brainwashing is, right?
Yeah.
Brainwashing is not some like really sophisticated scientific cloak and dagger spy manipulation skill tool that they use to get people to act like robots. They just fill your head with the message that they want, and they allow nothing else. So they chain people to the floor, and they yell things at them in a cell where they can't go anywhere, and they just keep doing it till that person believes it. It's a brute force technique.
Yeah.
And if you have people in your life who are calling you, and this is extreme, but they're just calling you shit and
Mm-hmm.
treating you like shit and telling you you're shit, and you absorb that your entire life, you're going to feel like shit. It's very simple.
Yeah.
Uh, you have the right to protect yourself. And
It's what
sometimes,
we call.
good.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Finish with your thought.
Sometimes that means I'm getting the fuck away from you.
Yeah. And this is like, these are the extreme terms of boundaries in
Yes.
relationships, right? And sometimes that's just what it has to be, depending on what the relationship dynamic is. Like, we do have to make a choice and really be able to stop and look at something and observe what kind of benefit we're getting from it, if there's any benefit, and what kind of harm we're getting from it in relationships too. And like, there's what we call clinically cognitive restructuring that happens via conditioning across our lifetime, right? There's things that happen, experiences, and they shape the way that we see things. And when you're talking about, like, if you're getting messaging that, you're shit, you're nothing, you don't matter, or you're bad, or whatever kind of negative messaging that can happen, we absorb that over time. And our brain defaults to believing that these things are true. Those are the neural pathways that are accessible to us. And then that feeds core beliefs,
Mm-hmm.
which become the core beliefs are the centers for what becomes the way that we view ourselves, other people, and the world.
Mm-hmm.
This is like the concept of what CBT revolves around, right? And that that can be really damaging to what's happening in our brains, in our psyche, around how we view ourselves, and then it's cyclical a bit in that sense, because there's this, if we're getting the conditioning and the messaging that says you don't deserve better than this, we are going to believe that over time with more and more exposure to that. And we are going to continue finding ourselves in relationships where it's like that. And so, really having to step back and think about how good your relationships feel. And not every relationship, like boundaries in relationships, are not always just in this like really, really big, daunting negative sense. It's not even an unhealthy dynamic all of the time. Like sometimes it's things with boundaries, I think, where it gets really complicated for people to recognize is learning what your own boundaries are. And sometimes that's just things that like maybe just don't feel good to you in a relationship with someone who is a really healthy person to be in a relationship with, someone that you really enjoy being in a relationship with. And still there are things that happen that just don't feel good when they happen that way. Or like I was saying earlier too, it can be the amount of energy expended on a certain person that you're in relationship with, and whether that's like the way that the energy that they bring and you recognize this is like a high energy person who then takes a lot of energy out of you even though you may really enjoy them. You may need to have boundaries around that relationship. Or if that's somebody who just tends to need a lot more of your bandwidth for time or attention or support and those kinds of things. Those are other things that are going to zap your energy. So being really mindful in those instances too. There's like the nuance dynamics that I'm talking about here, and then there are the way more obvious dynamics that it's like this is not healthy, but sometimes we don't even know that it's not healthy or that it's not good for us because of what I was saying about like the conditioning, that cognitive restructuring that has happened and it has made us believe that this is just how relationships function. This is what we deserve. This is what we get, and we need to make the best of it. And I think making that distinction too can be really huge for a lot of people as they're figuring out relationship boundaries.
Yeah. And this is like, if you're in a relationship, and we all are, it's like an ongoing conversation,
Mm-hmm.
about these. You may have like hard and fast rules, like when you first get together, and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
this is what I'm into. This is what I'm not into. This is what I'll do in bed. This is what I won't do in bed. This is like what I think is fun and not. And those are boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
But like, there's a lot. Relationships are complex,
Yeah.
and our feelings and our mood changes from time to time, depending on how we feel physically, what's going on in our life externally, that comes outside the relationship,
Mm-hmm.
what the relationship actually brings to it on its own, and we have to navigate around those.
Yeah.
I am prone to depression, and when I go into this depressive episode, um, tough. I'll suck the life right out of the room,
Mm-hmm.
and you can keep giving to me, and I'll just keep. I'm not taking. I'm just a black
Yeah.
hole in a sense.
Yeah.
And sometimes, like my partner, she her boundary around me is to just walk out of the room. It's better because it's an episode, and I'll go in and I'll come out. And it's not her weight to carry and fix that for me. And pull me out and drag me out. That would be a very hard task, and you can't succeed because when I'm in it, I fight to protect it in a way.
Yeah.
So
I'll drag you down before you drag me out.
yeah, I'm a drowning man. Yeah, that's exactly right. But if you step out of the room and thereby like protecting yourself from it so that it doesn't drag you down and drain you and hurt you, which I don't intend to do. I'm
Yeah.
lost in these moments.
Right.
And you let me like it's a brain chemical with me. I'm pretty sure it is a lack of producing serotonin or dopamine, and I will come out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go away for a little while and protect yourself, and then come back, I'll be here. I'll come back myself, and then we can meet again, and then we can talk about it. And we have put a container around that. I'm not going to hurt myself. Um, I'm safe in that way. I don't have that kind of that
Yeah.
level of depression, or I've learned to cope with that. And the fact that I know that I'm going to come out of it gets me to the other side quicker.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we practice this. That's another big point. Like It did just wasn't just like, okay, let's write this down, and now we got this well-defined boundary, and we're good, and it's been perfect and sweet and
Yes.
kind.
Yes.
It was hard, and it was probably scary for my partner when it first started to happen. She started to realize, oh, this is what I am. Because, to be honest, at that time, I didn't know I had depression. It was just who I was.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to do a lot of growth and a lot of learning around that. But now
Yeah.
we have a mutual toolkit
Yep.
around this, and now it is boundaries, but it is a habitual behaviors that we use to work around this part of Chris that's difficult.
Yeah. And I know your partner well, and I know that your partner is a empath to the highest degree and absorbs the emotional energy other
Yeah.
people give off. So that's a really important boundary for her, because like some people, there's some stuff, because for you, the way that you function too, you're very charismatic. It's really easy to get caught up in your energy. I say that as someone who works closely with you and knows you well. So there's an effect that you're going to have when you're on the other side of that and the energy is low. You're naturally going to pull people down because you pull people into you. You have this effect on people, and your partner has this way of absorbing other people's energy. And like, so you two together, that's a really important boundary for you guys to have. And I could see how like that that needing to be in place. And something that you're hitting on here too with this is like, boundaries aren't necessarily something that you recognize at the get-go. Sometimes they evolve, and as a
Yeah.
relationship evolves, and relationships of romantic variety, of platonic variety, of the familial variety, all of these have boundaries and places that we have to be looking for them. But like the big key point that you're talking about too is like really communicating along
Yes.
the way.
Yeah.
Like, because I'm assuming you guys didn't get to this point where it was just naturally put into place. Like there was a lot of discussion along the way in different points over the years that you guys have been together, probably where your partner's expressing how she's affected by those holes that you hit, and how you're explaining what that's like for you, and then working to figure out ways to maneuver that and make that work in a way where it's gotten to the point where a clear boundary came out of it, where your partner says, I just can't be part of it when it happens. But I mean, yeah, like the communication piece, is that accurate? Were you guys communicating about this along the way?
Absolutely. It may like we may have stumbled upon it, right? And that
Mm-hmm.
she's like, oh, this is bad juju. I got to get out of the room, you
Yeah.
know? And if we had gone on that way, that just having that boundary without communicated on it would have actually been a problem. And we
Mm-hmm.
probably would not, it would have probably hurt us both because I'm like, I might have felt like I was being abandoned. Like, what? I'm fucking suffering here and
Yes.
you're gone. And
Yes.
she's just like, I don't want to be around him.
Yep.
I don't like him like this.
Well, and
Um,
also it makes me feel bad. I'm speaking as your partner, but like it makes me feel bad because
yeah.
now I feel like shit too, where I was all right before.
Yeah. And so you're like, this person's bad. You just identify, all you get is the negativity out of it, right? Because you
Yeah.
haven't, like, it's just a problem. It's not dealt with, it's avoided. But the strategy is avoidance to a certain extent. But
Sure.
when you sat down and talked about it and clearly defined what was going on and that this we were how we were handling it and it was a strategy and it wasn't being abandoned, but she protecting herself and giving me space to go through it and protecting me because then I'm not like have to deal with the fact that I in an aspect of myself where I am really suffering, I lashed out at her.
Yeah.
So she protected me from having to deal with being a dick. So
Yeah.
that's good news. And once you do that and you turn it into a strategy, into a technique, instead of it this negative thing that breaks you apart, it
Mm-hmm.
actually is something that widens you together. It becomes like, oh, we got this. We can make this work. We can navigate this. We're a team. It's teamwork. Teamwork makes the dream work. Sorry, I said.
I'm really glad you brought that up actually, because what you're saying, boundaries, you said in the beginning of this, you were like, boundaries are just this way to say no to people, right? And no, that's not true. And what you're talking about is boundaries when done right, when they're intentional and methodical, they can strengthen relationships because especially when we're communicating well along the way and why we need a boundary in place, it's this way to expand our understanding of each other and to make our relationships feel better for us.
Mm-hmm. That's a good
I,
way of
I have
putting
a,
it.
I have similar similar but different boundaries with my husband Anthony. Like we I when it this is something that I think a lot of people may relate to in relationships too. But like when there's conflict, um, I'm the kind of person. Not always. It's gotten better as I've gotten older. I've talked about before in previous episodes, like my anger and how big my anger had gotten at one point. It looks a lot different than that now, but still, for me, I'm the kind of person, and I have to ride the emotional wave of whatever is going on for me. So conflict too. Like you too.
Mm.
Yeah. So like being able to just let me sit in that for a little bit is really important. But early on in our relationship, and as we spent years navigating this stuff, and it wasn't something that was even figured out in the first year or couple of years, to be honest, it took time to really understand. We were young when we got together too, so understanding ourselves and how we operate. But there's this expectation in relationships, a lot of time, this unspoken expectation. There's conflict, and we need to resolve it, especially if you're trying to combat the unhealthy dynamics of the people who you've seen who sweep their problems under the rug and then there's no resolution. So it's this healthy mindset. It's coming from this place of like, let's figure this out, let's figure out a way to move forward. How do we resolve? Great, I love that, except I can't do that in the moment because when
Mm.
conflict happens, I flip my lid and I have no access to anything effective or logical to be able to give that back. And for years, it's like my husband would come in and he has his own fears that play into this. We all have our own stuff. We call it the dance in relationships, but
Mm-hmm.
our stuff that we bring from childhood and other experiences into our relationships. But like he has his own experience of like there's urgency around fixing this ASAP because he can't tolerate the discomfort of it. And for me, I've always needed space. But early on, what he took that to mean was I was asking for space but didn't really want it, and I would be upset if he gave it to me, so he couldn't give it to me.
Mm.
It was this like he thought he was having to predict what was actually happening in my head that I wasn't communicating. And I thought that too for a really long time
Mm.
because I was like that's like the common in heterosexual relationship things, right? That's like what the women do. They say something but they want something else. And so I was like, okay, I guess, but over time I was like it would just get worse. We would get into bigger conflict that was unnecessary because we would be engaged for far too long and not giving myself time to get my brain back online, to be able to ride my emotional wave myself and then be able to come back to you and engage in conflict resolution. Right, like,
Yeah.
and it was over time of like it was like you said, we kind of stepped into it a little at a time with exposure where I said I do really need to have you away from me right now. Like, I'm not saying that from a place of like I want to feel like you're fighting for me. I get it, I know you want to have this conversation, but like this is not working for me. And then that was really hard for him because for him to have to back off from finding this fix to the problem was really hard and uncomfortable for him. But then, so over time, and now we're at this point where we realize that the boundary around conflict for us in our relationship there has to be space in between.
Mm-hmm.
It's uncomfortable for him still to this day, just because of the way that he functions. And, but it helps me be way more effective and be able to think through and come back in a place where I can see his side of things because as it's happening, it's unfolding. I'm seeing only my side.
Yeah.
That's just how it works. And until I have that time and space to separate it out and remind myself that this is a person on the other end that I love deeply, and I don't want to be like against him. I want to understand where he's coming from, and we're doing that. And but with that, a boundary that we need to put in place with that too is that I have to be able to express that to him in a way that doesn't feel like abandonment or like I'm giving up or
Mm.
I'm sick of him. So it's this, because that's the thing that helps him also manage that discomfort on his side where it's like, okay, Bree needs space. that's okay. That's reasonable because I know we're going to come back to this. I know we're going to have this conversation and we'll fix it. It doesn't have to be fixed right this second. He can tolerate it a lot better if I'm saying I need time to wrap my head around all of this. Like I'm not leaving, right? Or I'm not saying that this is done or this is unresolvable. I'm just saying I need some time. Give me some time. Let me wrap my head around this. I'll come back to you when I feel like I'm in a better place to have a conversation. And that actually opened up something on his end that he didn't even realize was that he needs that time too.
Hmm.
He's been so conditioned to feel like you just have to fix it right then that he actually needs that time too. And what he has learned about himself is he needs time to write about what's going on
Hmm.
because that's how he actually understands what's going on in his brain to get it all out. Otherwise, it's a jumble in his head and he can't figure out what he's actually thinking about it or where he's going with something. So, like, now we're at this point where we both call for time and space when we need it, depending on what's happening. Sometimes I'm okay enough, my lid hasn't flipped, the conflict isn't big enough for my lid to have flipped. I'm okay enough to keep having this conversation. And he says, pause, my brain can't catch up and I need time to think about this before we go further into this conversation because he'll get really influenced by what I'm saying. This goes back to the conversation on our last episode about processing speed and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can go, 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 but he can't. He has to give his brain that time to catch up. And part of that is him writing it out afterwards. It's something that helps cement in his brain. And so there's an evolution to this as I'm talking about like what we've learned and what we've both learned. And to the point of you said, where we stepped into it kind of accidentally in some ways. And then we were like, wait, that felt good. Let's tweak it a little bit. This feels better. And then now it's at a point where conflict can be navigated really well between
Yeah.
the two of us.
Yeah. There's a lot of techniques in that. You know,
Yeah.
we can't. We're incapable of accurately communicating and dealing with this right now because we're not in sync. Do we
Yeah.
wait and then we'll get there? What do I have to do to like get closer? What do I need? The other person needs to get closer, and that takes time and practice. Um, but like, it's very rewarding
Mm-hmm.
when you kind of figure that out. It's like, oh fuck yeah, teamwork. It really is like
Yeah.
it does feel good to feel
Yes.
like it makes you guys, it makes the two of you feel strong.
It becomes a deeper understanding for us against our own conditioning, our
Yeah,
own maladaptive ways that we've dealt with things, and figuring out it's that like kind of cheesy saying, but it's us against the problem, not us against each other. And
sure.
that's what helps. That is like, yeah, there's nothing. Neither one of us is doing something wrong.
Yeah,
We can't help the emotional response or the cognitive response to something, and needing that time and needing that space or that ability to process something or turn something over differently. But where it becomes a problem is when both people's lids are flipped at the same time. Now, neither of us, the neuroscience of that, neither of us has access to our prefrontal cortex, can't do anything effective or productive in that time. And then it's really easy. Once one person's lid is flipped, the other person's is going to flip too, because that's just what we do as humans. And recognizing that we can support each other and ourselves and saying, all right, this maybe isn't the best practice, even though there's that saying, don't go to bed mad. Fuck that saying. Fuck that saying. Because like I have learned one of the best things for us, this is our dynamic, but like it if we're if we're mad at each other or we're in the midst of conflict or something, I need that time to sleep on it
yeah,
sometimes because we talked about it before. That's where restoration happens. That's where problem solving is happening. That's where our brain is turning over all of the emotional turmoil of the day and helping us make sense of it. For me, on the other side of sleep is clarity a lot of times.
yeah,
I'm not going to go to bed saying, fuck you, I hate you, or something terrible,
sure.
but like, I am going to go to bed and say, I'm still upset and I need time. Let me sleep
Yeah,
on it. Let's talk later.
yeah, yes. There is like, sometimes I think about it as like you have like a health bar in a video game, you know,
Yeah.
and it's, you're running on the ragged edge. When you're running on the ragged edge, it's tooth and nail, or it's very,
Yeah.
that's very close.
Mm-hmm.
When you're fully rested and present, it's much, you have much more resources to deal with the shit. I was talking to Alex, my partner, about. something similar to this in our ride home today,
Mm-hmm.
where we do this thing where she's very well educated in um, nonverbal communication in mammals.
Mm-hmm.
So seems like a lot, but she's a horse trainer and dog trainer, and we're just mammals, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
one of the things that we do, like, is one of the bigger, most useful mental models I've learned in life is the fear bite. Is when an animal's distressed, it's scared, and you get too close to it, it may have nothing to do with you, but it might just bite you.
I mean, you experienced that
Yeah,
firsthand.
I experienced that, like, in a very as real as it could be. One of my dogs was being attacked by the other dogs, and I went to save its life. I was saving it, protecting it from the others, and I grabbed it, and in its distress, it turned on me and it bit through my face and
Yeah.
almost took off my bottom lip, and I had to have 27 stitches, and I'm still traumatized by the experience. I'm much better now, but it was bad.
Yeah.
Uh, we do this too. Human beings do this too.
Yeah.
And we can bite each other. And in those circumstances, when you're both very escalated and you're in that fight or flight mode, the fear biting can get very ugly and cause a lot of damage.
Yeah.
Uh, and then the problem's getting out of hand, and it can get much, much worse. Then sometimes the little inciting incident, or maybe it's not,
Yes.
maybe it's not even, maybe there's something else, and you're already in a bad place, and then you had a stressful moment together, and you fear bite the other person, and then they get, what the fuck? I didn't do shit to you, and then it's game on, and
Mm-hmm.
that's just like neither one of you wanted that,
Right.
and now you're hurting each other.
And now we're so far away from where this started. Like this,
Mm.
whatever it was, whether it was a bad mood or it was a little argument, this thing that could have been resolved so much more easily has become this big thing now because
Mm.
now we're at odds with each other and we are ready to fight.
And this, people destroy each other this way, and
Yeah.
marriages fall apart, relationships fall apart,
Yeah. Yeah.
family relationships have a lot of this too.
Yeah, let's talk about the family stuff because we're talking about our relationships, and that's a little bit of the glimpse into what we were talking about with like, the healthy relationships that we have and that we enjoy, and what boundaries can look like in those. But like, you've got some very, very specific and very wildly different boundaries.
Yeah.
Me too. Um, in your family system. So like, what have you had to do and what have you noticed in your family system that led to boundaries that you've put into place in the way that you function in those kinds of relationships?
Well, without going too deep into it, because I
Mm-hmm.
think there's a lot to it,
Mm-hmm.
I think in my family, there are um, a number were compromised in a bunch of different ways or similar ways, and we get escalated very quickly, and we have done a lot of damage to one another. We didn't have I didn't grow up knowing a lot of nuance to a lot of this stuff, to how to relate to people. It was very much a my father was a my way or the highway kind of a guy,
Yeah.
and my brother was abusive to me. Um, and as I grew older, I'm a sensitive guy, and at first I knuckled under because I was getting it from two sides,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't. I that's not me. I'm not necessarily aggressive. I'm not.
Yeah.
That's not my reaction to life. And at one point, like, I just had to. I got bigger, literally big enough to fight, and I started to
Mm-hmm.
fight back,
Yeah.
and that helped a lot. As ugly as that was, I had to be able to defend myself at a certain level. But they were just, this is all they had to give me at that point in my life, was that
Yeah.
aggression, and I have gone low contact
Mm-hmm.
from these people in my life. I love them. I have a
Mm-hmm.
very strong sense of duty as a son and a brother, but I have space from them And there is there's pain in this, and
Yeah.
this is a blunt instrument, a blunt way of dealing with this that I have chosen and I have done. But I wasn't able to fully individuate and become myself and mature when I was in that space. I was all reactive, you know?
Oh
But
my god, dude. Same. Same.
it was all reactive, you know? And
Yeah.
it was just like, fuck you, you know? And I cut him off. I cut my brother off.
Hmm.
Um, and that has been, it protected me.
Yeah.
And I went out, I was able to live my own life. It has come at some cost. And the fact that we are now estranged.
Hmm.
I still have communicate with my parents. I am on halfway across the country from them. And there was a lot to this. When I moved, I was putting a boundary for me in alcohol, and from my work life experience, which was ugly and a dying life. Um, and I opened up a new vista, new possibilities. So that's I've kind of stepped away from a very clear kind of definition of what this was, but like if I didn't get out, I was going to drown and I was going to die.
Yeah.
And so I did. I did get out, and it opened up a lot of possibility in my life for me to explore different ways of being me and stronger, healthier, fuller. Just I found Chris.
Hmm.
And I'm not really as clear on you can explain this a lot better than I can, but it was in a sense like a do or die thing, I think.
Hmm.
Um, and I had to. I remember reading a while ago about a guy who came from extreme poverty, and he saw everybody around him and his family and friends and all of them just going down, and it was either through violence, prison, drugs and alcohol, extreme poverty, you know, no lack of opportunity, bad health, all this
Yeah.
stuff. And he fought and kicked, and he got out through school. He was a
Mm.
strong student, and then he went to college, and then he got a good job, and he started making money, and then he went back home, and they all turned on him.
Mm.
People who were very close to him before, who are you to like? How, you think you're better than this? All this stuff,
Yeah.
and he had to navigate that space because they were still in it
Yep.
and they couldn't see the path that he took. They were probably just projecting their own pain onto him and attacking.
Well, and he moved out of the box, the familiarity box, and they didn't know what to do with that.
Yeah, that's not the same thing that happened to me, but it is this occurs, and like if in we were talking about more nuanced relationships, like um, so I've still I'm still in contact with my parents. And if I get the phone call like something bad happened or something, we need you, I'm there. No questions. I'm there. I do that. I
Yeah.
feel duty and I love them. It's better for me if I'm not around.
Yeah.
It's just better. We're
Yeah.
very different in that regard. What I want to say, and then I want to hear what you think about all this,
Yeah.
is um, sometimes we get slotted into roles in our family. We call it, the family dynamic,
That's right.
and it gets into you. It happens. You get assigned this role, not necessarily like premeditated by any parties, but it
Yeah.
happens, and you grow into it. So you develop into this role, and it may be very unfair, and it may require a lot of sacrifice that you didn't get asked to make, and that ain't right. And people just expect it of you, and you go through life doing this, and it's because you're giving so much of yourself. There's not enough left for you, for you to fully live your life. And unless you know this and you see this and you take action on it, it's going to eat you. It's going to eat you up.
Yep.
And you got to deal with it.
Yep. And what you're talking about too is like in your family system, the way that you're talking about it, because you said like how you had to have your boundaries and kind of separate yourself out and go low, no contact. There's this, you have this very deeply embedded duty to the people that you care about. And for
Yes.
you, this plays into some deep existentialism for you, because there was this choice point at some point where it was like, I bet that there was still a brotherly duty that you felt, and there was this pull, but somewhere you had to evaluate for yourself, like, this is fucking terrible. I can't live like this. Like you said, I'm drowning. It is having huge adverse effects on me. And this just isn't tolerable. This isn't going to work. I can't live. I won't have a life to live if I keep going like this. And then so having to put those boundaries in place, going against your own um, your own primary values that you seem to have taken with you throughout your lifespan too. But like knowing, so that's hard. I'm pointing that out because that's a hard thing to do. It's when there is a boundary that we see that we have to put into place, but knowing it goes against something very, very deeply important to us and part of our identity of like who we are, how we respond to people. That's so hard, and it can feel even harder to do because it's hard to reconcile for us a lot of times that this thing is selfish because we need it. And that is, though, like our life is about having to make choices like that for ourselves because nobody else can make a choice like that for us to protect us in that way. We have to be the ones privy to it and aware of it and making those calls. But damn, if it doesn't go against like every fiber of your being, sometimes I think
Yes.
that's where people keep themselves stuck in these sorts of dynamics because
Yeah.
the obligation or the duty or the values that they have, it pushes too far against that, and they just can't justify doing it.
Yeah. Uh, I think you nailed it. That's the whole thing. That's the crux of this entire conversation right there. And I remember I used to put it to myself uh, like this: um, you don't have a right to stand up for yourself. You do, but the reality is you have a responsibility to stand up for yourself. You have to.
Yeah. Yep.
You have to, um, because if not, it crushes you. And you can do it. You can live that way. You can live a crushed life, and it will malform you. It will
Yep.
twist you, and it will come out in weird, odd, usually unhealthy ways. And maybe none of us get this completely like one fullest,
Sure.
healthiest, completest Chris.
Yeah.
Um, this is a this is a difficult path that we all walk,
Mhm.
uh, but that's what boundaries are about. Boundaries are rules that we put in place to help us walk it.
Yeah.
Because it gives us these signposts for what we will and will not do, and it allows us to walk our path and be and have this healthier life. It's no guarantee that everything's going to be complete,
Yep.
um, but if you do it and you practice it and you have somebody else who respects your boundaries
Hmm.
and works on theirs and helps you work on theirs, teaches you
Hmm.
theirs, you will get better at it.
Yeah. Boundaries are not just, sometimes they are, they're not just a way to say no to
Yeah,
other people.
yeah,
They're a way to say yes to you.
yes, and other people.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
want to have a relationship with you. I just need it to be in a way that feels good.
Yeah.
I want to have a relationship with you,
Yeah.
and like same thing, and that depends. Like that depends on the person at the other end of the boundaries too, because if a person can respect that, and it takes time. We're not asking anybody to immediately, but like when a new boundary is put into place, sure, there's adjustment for everybody. We all have to adapt. But like if a person is showing a willingness and a desire to meet your boundaries, that's great, because that's where like the difference of maybe you don't have to cut that relationship off. If you had um, family members who maybe could have been more understanding of why you needed things a certain way before it got to the point of such detriment for you, it may not have had to go there, and that's we can't control other people's receptivity to
Yeah.
our needs and to our boundaries. We can communicate those. We can't. It is not fair for us to expect people to predict or just know these things without us um, expressing them. That's important. We have to express it. We have to ask for it. We have to let people know what we need. The thing with boundaries too, this is a clinical piece that I just make sure that I always say with clients that I'm working with in coaching. Boundaries are not simply, they can start in places of like other people's behavior. We have no control over other people's behavior. If you try to set your boundaries and you can't do this to me, you can't do this to me, and that's the boundary. That's not a boundary. That's just a rule. The boundary needs to be something in your control, because
Mm-hmm.
that's what we've got. That's what
Mm-hmm.
we're actually dealing with in life. What's in our control is what we can do something about. So it can be, hey, I'm not okay with it when you treat me like X or you talk to me like Y or whatever it is. And when you do that, I will not engage with you. If you do that, I will not have a relationship with you. Those are what actual boundaries are. I think a lot of times people get confused because they put something in place that they feel like was a boundary. That's more of a rule or an expectation of another person. Someone doesn't meet it, and then they feel so defeated because it's like, well, I put this boundary in place and they didn't respect it. The boundary has to have a response. That's the full boundary. The full
Yeah.
circle of a boundary has to be your response to it. And sometimes it's a lot of trial and error and practice in like, it's hard to be firm in new boundaries, and especially because people are going to push against them. Human nature is people are used to what they're used to, so they're going to push against your boundaries. Your responsibility is staying firm and consistent in your boundaries. Their responsibility is to learn from that or to not, and then for you to enact whatever is on the other side of that. If they're responding well to that, then great, you get to have a relationship with this person that you care enough about to do that. If they don't, that's where you might make the choice to go low contact or no contact with somebody, or whatever other kind of boundary that you may need to have in place. But like that's a really important piece of boundaries that I think can kind of get lost sometimes, is we're focused so much on um, other people's responses or behavior that we start to feel like we have no control. And then what's the point of having a boundary if I can't make somebody follow it? The point of having a boundary is that you follow it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the things. It's like it's actionable, and action
Yeah.
comes from you. Like if when I talked about earlier about like getting slotted into a role where you're carrying the weight of other people, and you're like this position I'm in sucks. It's unfair,
Yeah.
and then trying to like fix everybody else, it ain't gonna work, son, because
No.
you can't look. You'll end up being in a reactive relationship in that regard, because you need to get your shit together, you need to get the shit together, you need to get the shit together, and that is a weight outside yourself that is keeping you in that position, but now it's conflict oriented. But
Mm-hmm.
if you say I won't allow this anymore, this is my boundary, and when it's a negative circumstance, and then you hold that line, they have to work around that, you know
Yeah.
and
Or they
they
don't.
or they don't, and then you make a decision based on that. You have like a decision
Right.
tree, you know
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
like there may be a time where the relationship is not worth the violation of your boundary. That's what it comes
Yep.
down to at the core,
Totally.
in the sense of like, I do not give this person um, uh, access to me any longer.
Yep.
That's what it is. We're controlling that
Mm-hmm.
access.
Yep.
um, and it's not all negative, like we keep saying. You know,
No.
it's very
No.
important. Like it's not all negative. Some of this is opting in. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I need to do, I'm holding boundaries with myself on my own behavior because I have a very reactive nature.
Yeah.
And sometimes I react to things aggressively. Now I'm actually talking about myself. Sometimes I get
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
reactive and it's in an aggressive way. And I don't want to be that guy.
Yep.
Sometimes I do, but a lot of times I don't because it's not appropriate to the circumstances of the person. And my reaction will be to be that guy. But I have learned to put a boundary to myself where I catch that and then I de-escalate. I think of it as humbling myself. And
Mm-hmm.
I shrink myself a little bit. I make myself a little bit smaller and then re-engage
Yep.
because that's who I want to be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and sometimes, like, it is, I have negative self talk. I have a pool, self loathing right next to me that I can dip into my toe or my entire self.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes from a long life. But I have other tools now. So sometimes if I'm starting to do that, starting to step into that pool, I have a boundary where I'm like, no, you don't get to do that. I'm practiced at the self loathing, and it's
Mm-hmm.
very accessible, and it came in my early development, and so it's there. I haven't fully banished it from my life. I'm perfectly healed, but I have these other tools, and I require myself to use them because I want to be that person. I want to be this person. I don't want to be this self-destructive.
Yep. Having boundaries with ourselves is the starting point to start having boundaries in any kind of relationships that we have, because the boundaries with ourselves are usually forged out of a place of like our core values, this person that we want to be. If we're in perfect alignment with ourselves, our version of ourselves, or aiming, continuing to grow towards the version of ourselves that we want to be, there's going to be boundaries that we have, like not pulling someone else in to your depressive state, right? That's a boundary that you have for yourself. Not me not exploding because my anger was so big and so centered in everything for so long. I don't want to pull somebody else into that. I don't need to drag somebody else down. um, might have boundaries around um, like empathy and compassion to other people, and making sure that, like, in an instance, we, having the distinction of, I'm not going to people please. I'm not going to do something just because it makes somebody happy. But I do, it's something that I value for myself is compassion and empathy. And I want to allow flexibility and being able to offer that to somebody. And these are the circumstances in which I'm willing to do that for another person, knowing that it's not violating a boundary of I'm people pleasing or I'm getting walked on like a doormat.
Mm-hmm.
But this is something maybe integral to my identity of allowing people grace, and I want to be able to extend that, knowing these sort of parameters for myself, right?
Yeah, I think people pleasing. I'm glad you brought that up because I hadn't thought of it. That's common,
Yeah.
and you can just give yourself all away. You can give it
Yeah.
all, and other people, plenty of people, just take everything and forget about you by
Sure.
lunch. You know,
Sure.
and there are people out there who are active predators,
Yeah.
and that takes a lot of different forms and shapes. And that may be because that's they've been hurt,
Sure.
and they were all they know is warfare, and they have a very zero sum sense of life. Um, and those people need to learn boundaries too. But you gotta,
Yeah. Or
it
their
doesn't,
own conditioning. Where,
yes.
just to jump into that, if your conditioning is the messaging that you have to give, you have to people please, you have to make other people happy, you don't deserve to think of yourself. These other people may have been conditioned to believe that people should give to them. There's different conditioning that we all receive, and that's based on our experience and our exposure. So they may not even be coming actively from a place of wanting to just take, but they do.
Yeah. Yeah.
The emotional vampires.
Yeah. Yeah. And they have to own it.
Yeah.
Everything we're talking about is centered, I think all of the stuff that we talk about life, is, for me at least, is centered in personal responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
You must take responsibility for your own life, and
Yeah.
not, we don't have full control. We'll never have full control. um, but we have to take control in ourselves and enact as much as we can, and that means the good and the bad. I'm getting a little bit more gray area, but that's
It's
what
the
I like.
locus of control
Yes. Yeah.
concept, right? Like
Yeah.
you can, what's in your control, analyzing that first, and then also not getting caught up in the mindset that external locus of control, that everything's out of your control and is up to some greater thing, other people or fate or God or luck or whatever, and recognizing areas where you have control, not disempowering yourself so much that you're like, well, nothing I can do about anything,
Mm.
and that's a big thing at the core of what we always talk about.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really important to remind people of that because we can get caught up very much in that external locus of control and the belief that it's all outside of anything that we can do about it, and I don't that it just doesn't serve us.
No, you won't get poor results that
Yeah.
way. It may make you abandon yourself. It allows you to just like slip into pure hedonism, and just sensuality. Although it
Mm-hmm.
plays a part in life, but if that's all you got, that's not the fullest you. You want to
Yeah.
live, I think, to a certain extent. We want to live intentionally. We want to make our
Yeah, you're gonna feel like
choices.
a victim
Yeah.
if that happens. You're gonna just, everything happens to you, and this is just the hand I was dealt, and there's nothing I can do about it. And a lot of probably woe is me is going to come out of that, and then probably like that's the view of self, and the view of others is that other people aren't safe or other people don't care, and the view of the world is that the world is unfair and it's unjust, and then everything comes through that lens in
Yes.
your brain. It gets filtered through your eyes and that lens and hits your brain as you are a victim, and you cannot move yourself out of that.
Yeah. That's a very. It can be a very powerful, a very like because there's a lot of negativity, really bad shit in the world,
Yeah,
and it is a deep, dark well, and it is addictive. I believe, in some sense.
sure.
You got to hold boundaries against that. Don't
Yeah.
and fight that. Um, you do not want to go through life as a victim. Your life, we have different levels of access, and we have different levels of privilege, and we're born into different environments. Um, you know, your space may be very small, literally, physically
Mm-hmm.
small. You don't have a lot of access to things, but
Mm-hmm.
you can still protect your core and have some pride in self realization, in holding your line and having principles and ethics and taking care of yourself. Um, and sometimes it's not a lot, but it is at least you are defining yourself.
Yeah. Yep. And that's, I think that's like an important point as we're getting close to landing this thing is like our boundaries in relationships have to come from having and knowing our boundaries with ourselves, and from evaluating in our relationships, stopping and
Yeah.
looking, because we do still get caught up in just the natural flow of things that we're not all, and this is life, this is all the stuff that we talk about, like examine your life as you go and not at the end, because hindsight's 2020 and nobody wants to get there and say, oh my god, I have 80 years of corrections that I could have made if I would have stopped somewhere and analyzed it. Analyze that in your relationships. If you're not, if for the first time you're thinking about what feels good to you in your relationships and what doesn't, and boundaries you may need to have, that is the starting point, because a lot of times we don't even think about that. We just do what is instinctual and what is the default, and stepping outside of that to just first observe your boundaries that with other people, and then turn it all inward and outward, reflect and introspect, because like what's related to other people is related to you, what's related to you may relate to other people, like so all of this stuff goes together. Boundaries with other people are not a separate concept from boundaries that we have with ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, you know, look at your feelings. Find out where they're coming from. If
Mm-hmm.
feelings overwhelm you, why? And we want to seek to control and regulate these. Not necessarily get to like pick and choose how we feel
Mm-hmm.
always, but we can react to it and control our reactions to a certain extent. Um, and I know this is a little bit off topic, but like one of the biggest things I ever did for myself, because I had a lot of pain, and I still do at times.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think we run away from our pain or we lash out. Those are like the two, basic ways of
Yeah.
dealing with it. One of the
Mm-hmm.
biggest things I ever did with myself, and this is, I think, something I learned from CBT, is I sat with it.
Yep.
I would literally sit down on a couch when I felt like really depressed and not
Mm-hmm.
go anywhere, not do anything. Just like, this is my depression. I'm going to feel it and I'm going to ride the whole wave, go through the entire cycle until I come back to myself. And that was really, really empowering
Yep.
because I realized that I wasn't my depression. I was
Yeah.
myself, and I will come back to myself. And this is just a feeling, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't have to run away from it, and I don't have to uh, just do something. I can tolerate it. I can make it through this, and that opened up a whole new vista of ways of handling it, and it freed me from it because I realized it wasn't going to destroy me.
Yep. That's separating out identity from emotion. We've talked about that before,
Mm.
but it's huge because when you take on your emotions as part of who you are, you can get really bogged down by the negative emotions. And we all experience negative emotions. They are not traits, they're not characteristics of ourselves. And I think one of the best things I've learned to do for myself, similar to you, but it's sitting with my own emotions. And I do it differently, but like it's the same concept where for me, it's like the emotion comes in and I'm asking it questions.
Mm.
Like, what are you here and what are you trying to tell me and what are you trying to protect me from? What are you trying to guard me from? Um, why is this popping up? This is here for a reason, right? So trying to understand that emotion is a big part of the process for me because, especially vulnerable emotions or anger, because anger is a vulnerable emotion for me now, even though it's less traditionally vulnerable than sadness or fear. But there's still this like for me, it's vulnerable because I don't want to be an angry person
Yeah.
anymore after that was so much of my identity and understanding why I'm angry because there's a part of me trying to protect myself, right?
Yeah.
And like acknowledging that and saying to myself, like, I see you. I see you, dude. You tried to have my back. This isn't the way. This isn't probably maybe our most productive way to do this, but like, I see where you're coming from and I see that your intentions were good, and we can turn it around. Let's do it a different way. Like, let's acknowledge this anger in a way that's not so big and
Yeah.
not so scary, right?
Yeah. That's like recognizing it and sitting with it, analyzing it is the first step to controlling it instead of being
Mm-hmm.
controlled by it. Like if
Totally.
I was the same way. All I had was anger and bitterness,
Yep.
and if that's all you have, you could actually be a powerful. You could get shit done with
Sure.
that and inflict your will and
Yes.
damage others and just like swing all the time.
Yeah. You'll
Um,
get your needs met.
but that's all you'll ever be.
Yeah.
And you're going to suffer because anger, even when it's addictive, you're it's still like a reaction. It's
Mm-hmm.
still it is still an emotion uh, that is away from you, that is pulling you away from your core, where you're just at peace and in control and zen. And I was,
You're centering an identity around an emotion, which is exactly what we're saying.
yeah,
Separate them out.
yeah,
Like,
that's it. That's it. Yeah, that's all you ever gonna be, and that
yeah.
ain't enough. Yeah, and we figure this stuff out and we start figuring out the boundaries we need to hold with ourselves and the boundaries we need to hold with others. And we start holding those boundaries and we see who the people are that can respect and hold those boundaries in turn and require us to hold boundaries. And the people that don't, we opt out of that relationship and we end up improving our environment
Yep. Mm-hmm.
and a better life comes out of it.
Yep.
Okay.
Good.
Is that
I
good?
think we can land.
All right, I'm landing this thing. Okay. Thank you all for coming. Definitely on the Rose podcast. Appreciate you. Appreciate you. Uh, hold your boundaries.
Hold your boundaries.
Yeah,
Know your boundaries.
Yeah, know your boundaries, hold your boundaries. All right.